Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow? Here we go again on the flip-flop merry-go-round of Oakland Mayor Jean Quan after she and the police falsely try to pin a shooting in a dangerous downtown area on Occupy Oakland.
I'm calling on the campers to please leave voluntarily tonight.
The excuse in Burlington, Vermont, a suicide inside the Occupy camp.
Our responsibility is to keep the public safe, and when you have a discharge of a firearm in a public place like this, it gives good cause to be concerned.
So discharge of a firearm in a public place, does that mean you have to shut down the entire country? But Occupy Santa Clara gets a camping permit. Occupy in general gets unlikely support from a general.
Demonstrating like this is as American as apple pie.
And on Veterans Day, Occupy and the vets.
You are the people who are awake. You are the people who have the minds to understand what's really going on. We need to continue to protest and continue to do it peacefully.
And check out Jay-Z's new Occupy Wall Street t-shirts. You know what percentage of his profits go to Occupy Wall Street? 0%. Nice. As his support by women drops to 15%, Herman Cain makes another mistake. And Rick Perry makes another mistake.
Hey, I was up late last night watching Dancing with the Stars.
Oh, I see. Well, sure. That explains it.
Is he in summer stock in Austin or something? Sadly, he is not in jail or something. It's Karl Rove attack ad season.
At Occupy Wall Street, protesters attack police, do drugs, and trash public parks. They support radical redistribution of wealth and violence. But Warren boasts, I created much of the intellectual foundation for what they do. I support what they do.
Fridays with Thurber, how to adjust yourself to your work. And worsts, little Jimmy O'Keefe is back with the scandal of the journalist who used an F-bomb. And little Jimmy just got owned.
Why did you dress like you were in some of your other videos?
And then he got stuck trying to get out the exit door. All that and more now on Countdown. Good evening from New York. This is Friday, November 11th, 361 days until the 2012 presidential election. Occupy camps under pressure to pack up and go after bodies were found in tents in 2 cities and a shooting claimed a victim near 3rd. None of the incidents apparently have anything to do with the protests, as Occupy protesters in New York march with veterans on Veterans Day to a concert with Joan Baez. Fifth story on the Countdown, Occupy protesters facing a stark choice: strike your camp or face arrest and perhaps the threat of more police violence. The pressure especially strong in Oakland following a fatal shooting that may have been a fight gone bad near the Occupy camp at Frank Ogawa Plaza last night. Protesters insisting the violence had nothing to do with the Occupy movement, but local business interests and many city council members want the protesters to finally go. And so now does Oakland Mayor Jean Quan.
I'm calling on the campers to please leave voluntarily tonight.
Probably would be a good idea if she left voluntarily her office. The Oakland police also calling for Occupy to leave, writing in an open letter, with last night's homicide in broad daylight, Frank Ogawa Plaza is no longer safe. Please leave peacefully with your hands held high so we can get police officers heads heads held high so we can get police officers back to work fighting crime in Oakland neighborhoods. An attempt to remove the camp by force on October 25th resulted in more than 100 arrests and a fractured skull from a tear gas canister for Iraq war veteran and protester Scott Olson. Elsewhere in the Occupy movement in Salt Lake City, the camp at Pioneer Park has been ordered closed by sunset Saturday. This after a man died overnight in a camp tent, apparently from a toxic mix of carbon dioxide poisoning and drugs. Police Chief Chris Burbank told reporters, we can no longer have individuals camping on our streets. In Burlington, Vermont, the Occupy camp will likely be closed for good after a suicide Thursday and confrontations that followed between protesters and police. In St. Louis, Occupy told protesters, or police told Occupy protesters, they had until 3 p.m. to remove their tents, until 10 p.m. to leave their camp in Keener Plaza. Those who stay will face eviction and possibly arrest. Many protesters say they are staying, while their attorneys seek a federal restraining order to stop the eviction. But in Santa Rosa, California, a completely different outcome. Occupy protesters there striking a deal with the city council for camping permits to allow them to stay in their tents on the city hall lawn. One protester spoke with reporters.
This right here is my home, and I'm here to stay.
For more, as Occupy Oakland approaches what could be another violent confrontation with police, we're joined by Josh Holland, senior writer and editor with AlterNet. Josh, thanks again for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
What's going on tonight, do we know? Are people taking the latest deadline and, in fact, the latest reversal of stance from the mayor seriously?
I think they are. The eviction of Oakland, the sense among the campers is that this is a matter of when, not if. By all signs indicate that there is going to be another eviction, and there is going to be a good deal of violence involved.
Do you have a sense of that in terms of proportion or the nature of the thing relative to the last one?
I feel like the campers have really dug in and dedicated themselves to remaining, so I think that this is going to be a very ugly clash.
The shooting, do Oakland police believe that it has any connection with Occupy? Is it being used as an excuse? Are you convinced that it doesn't? Because there was a woman who has been at least at Occupy Oakland who said that was her cousin and he had stayed with her in her tent at Occupy Oakland.
It's entirely possible that he had stayed there a couple of nights before. I spoke with 3 eyewitnesses who said that the fight started outside the camp, kind of moved through the camp, and then this tragedy happened on the far end of the camp. You know, this is the 101st homicide in Oakland this year. It's a real tragedy. I spoke to people out there who were saying that another young man had been shot to death just catty-corner from the incident last night, and you know, there were no news vans, there were no helicopters overhead. So I think that this is being used as a premise by City Hall officials to evict the camp, but you know, these problems run deep in the community. They're social problems that aren't going to be addressed by, you know, evicting the occupation.
Is there a sense, give us a sense, because I don't think everybody knows the geography of downtown Oakland, about just what kind of area we're talking about and how unlikely it is that there would be a shooting that had no connection to the camp so close to the camp, or how likely it might be.
Well, again, this is the fifth. This is the city with the 5th highest violent crime rate in the United States. It is in downtown Oakland. It's not a residential area. There's mostly office buildings around. But, you know, again, we've heard that these things happen all the time. Somebody told me yesterday that if this had taken place in West Oakland, the body would still be sitting there hours after the fact. So, you know, or take, for example, the incident in Burlington, Vermont, a tragic suicide by a veteran. There was a report out just 10 days ago that found that a veteran attempts to commit suicide every 80 minutes on average. There were 1,868 suicide attempts among veterans in 2009 alone. So again, these problems aren't going to be swept under the carpet if we get rid of the occupations. And I think that they, you know, one of the things that makes them prone to this kind of demagoguery by people who want to oust them is that they're open to the marginalized among society, the people that, you know, most of us tend to ignore.
We're going to address the situation, the plight of the veterans, and particularly their interrelationship with Occupy in just a moment. But let me ask you one more question. Is there any sense of what's happening to Mayor Kwan? Has she managed to succeed in pissing off Occupy Oakland and everybody on the left, and pissing off the business community, and pissing off everybody in the middle? Because it seems like she's held every conceivable position on this entire issue of Occupy Oakland so far in the last 2 months.
I think that's a very good summary. She's being buffeted from the left for the violence of these crackdowns. You know, they're not playing well in a very progressive community, and members of the business community, local residents, are equally furious at her for letting the occupiers retake the plaza. So she has managed to handle this in such a way that just about everybody is harboring real grievances towards her.
Yeah, we suggested here quite a while ago she needed to resign after the first one, and I think now it's a question of basic competency. Josh Holland, senior writer and editor at AlterNet. Great, thanks again. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Keith. You too.
Here in New York, Occupy Wall Street observed Veterans Day with a march from Zuccotti Park to nearby Foley Square for a concert, for a rally for the 99%. Organizers calling it Honor the Dead, Fight Like Hell for the Living. Marine Sergeant Shamar Thomas, famous for defending Occupy protesters from New York police in Times Square last month, was among the veterans who spoke today.
I want to start off by saying again, happy Veterans Day to all the veterans, but I want you guys to understand that What is going on right now, you are the people who are awake. You are the people who have the minds to understand what's really going on. And so we need to continue to preach the word.
Among the singers who preached and performed, somebody who has been preaching the word about peace and nonviolence since the early 1960s, this time using a song by the Rolling Stones, Joan Baez.
Let's drink to the hard-working people. Let's drink to the salt of the earth. Let's drink to the hard-working people. Let's drink to the salt of the earth.
And while he is far from his roots among the salt of the earth in the Bronx, a very senior veteran, former Secretary of State General Colin Powell, had some kind words, unexpected ones perhaps, for the Occupy movement, while noting he was concerned when demonstrations turned into violence and didn't begrudge anybody who has earned a good salary.
Demonstrating like this is as American as apple pie. We need our political system to start reflecting this anger back into how do we fix it? How do we get the economy going again?
No, that would be a start. For more on America's veterans and the Occupy movement, I'm joined by Army veteran Jose Vasquez, Executive Director of Iraq Veterans Against the War. Thanks for coming in, sir.
Thanks for having me.
How did you get involved in this, and what do you see as its connection with Veterans Against the War?
Well, our national office is right down the street from Zuccotti Park. We're on Fulton Street, so we went down there. I really got involved once the unions called for a big rally in Foley Square, and I really saw that it was resonating with working class people across the country.
Given the, and our guest from Oakland, Josh Holland, referenced that horrific number about an attempted suicide by a vet every 80 minutes, given that and the horrific readjustment problems particularly facing vets from Iraq and Afghanistan, do you see an overlap of interest with Occupy and a chance to have Occupy essentially sponsor your message in this resonation that it has managed to achieve in 2 months?
Well, part of the message of the Occupy movement is homelessness and unemployment, and that's no secret for veterans across the country are dealing with that issue. Many veterans are looking for jobs as we speak. President Obama has a jobs bill that he's trying to push through, and we are ensuring that the veterans' voices are at the 99% part of the 99% message, as well as we see veterans that are just turning out and encamping in different places around the country.
Yeah, so much of it, as with the rest of this movement, whatever might be planned and whatever might be organized and phone calls made and people should get involved, so much of it seems to be so organic. And I'm thinking again about the gentleman we heard from again on the scene, Sergeant Shamar Thomas, and his original role in this of simply expressing his outrage that tactics that he recognized from his tours of duty were being used on the streets in Times Square about a month ago, totally out of proportion with what he was seeing. Did his position in this, or the roles of the other vets who sort of come into this organically, surprise you?
I'm not surprised. I think that a lot of veterans took an oath to serve the country, and they know that peaceably assembling is part of what the Constitution protects for us, and we take a lot of pride in that. I had the pleasure of meeting Sergeant Thomas. He's a great guy. He's come from a long line of military people.
Yes, he has.
And I think that people like him and other folks around the country are just packing their bags and showing up at different occupies and finding each other.
What is it about this? I'm sure you know this history better than I do. About the role of veterans in this country when they come home, and everybody in the country is willing to support a veteran while he's in uniform and and certainly when he's still before he's a veteran and he's still in the field. And yet, if you speak to truths about this society and how it's treating veterans or people who've never been near the military, there is some sort of friction to that, like, no, you've done your job and your job was to carry a gun. How does that, the history of protest in this country is filled with veterans groups that protested at various key points in American history. At the start of the Depression, the bonus army was made up of people who had been promised bonuses that weren't being paid, who desperately needed the money. Veterans of the First World War who were not getting their money and were starving to death without that money. Right. But the role of veterans on Veterans Day in terms of peaceful protest in this country, speak to that if you would.
I think getting involved in different movements as veterans is just an extension of the civic duties that we, took on when we volunteered to serve. And, General Smedley Butler was a highly decorated soldier in his time. He went and spoke to the people at the Bonus Army. Right. He called them, great Americans, and what they were doing was patriotic. So I think that, veterans getting involved in the Occupy movement is just a tradition of veterans being involved, standing up for the people. And, I think it's a way for us to bridge the gap to other folks that might, look at Occupy movements and not see their issues there. Getting veterans involved really adds a level of credibility, and it's a powerful voice.
And especially, you bring a point that seems so ignored these days. Volunteers. That you signed up for this. That there are many motives for reasons for people to join the military, but the volunteer is the universal for everybody, and that sense of service does not stop when you return home.
That's right. Yeah, I think that what the Occupy movement is showing is just the anger across the country. Veterans feel that anger. Veterans are dealing with suicide, unemployment, homelessness, and people are fed up.
Jose Vasquez, the executive director of Iraq Veterans Against the War. Thanks for your time, and of course, thanks for your service.
Thanks, Keith.
Happy Veterans Day. We want to congratulate Herman Cain for lasting 4 days after the first on-the-record revelation of his sexual harassment past. He's now third in the polls behind Gingrich, and he's making Anita Hill jokes. Next. Took 4 days, but Herman Cain has now plummeted to third in the Republican polls. He's behind Newt Gingrich and fallen fast. You can't win election on merits or popularity. Do what Karl Rove does. Take money from corporations and spread every goddamn lie you can think about a Democrat. The balding pile of baboon feces attacks Elizabeth Warren. The guy the media took seriously for some reason about Acorn. Watch him get shrunk at Columbia's journalism school. And Fridays with Thurber, back with his unbridled hatred of self-help books. How to adjust yourself to your work. Ahead on Countdown. Somewhere tonight, Newt Gingrich is saying, I knew it would happen, as he furiously rubs his ego. In our fourth story tonight, new poll showing support for Herman Cain and Rick Perry flagging while Gingrich surges. Mitt Romney, meanwhile, the Republicans' favorite fallback plan, still unable to move the needle. A new CBS poll shows Gingrich at 15%, tied with Romney, only 3 points behind Cain. This a week after Gingrich predicted the race would come down to him and Romney. Today, still seeming to like his own chances. As usual.
The real meaning of the poll is when the front runner's at 18 and the next two are tied at 15, it is a wide open race.
Thank you, Mr. Math. The McClatchy Marist poll showing Gingrich actually passing Cain to take second place with 19% of the vote, just 4 behind Romney. Cain may be lagging in part because of a not so surprising drop in his support among women. His backing from conservative women down nearly half since last month to 15%. He likely won't win them back with tone-deaf comments like this one about Anita Hill.
Did you hear the latest news today? Anita Hill is going to come out.
Spent today apologizing for that gaffe, with his press rep explaining it was a joke, just like the knee slapper about putting up that electric fence along the U.S.-Mexican border. Meanwhile, the joint news conference his accusers were reportedly planning might not happen after all. The lawyer for Karen Khrushchev, the second woman who went public, telling NPR she's having trouble convincing the others to take part. The only GOP candidate having perhaps a worse week than Herman Cain is Rick Perry, who's seeing his poll numbers fall into single-digit Michelle Bachmann, Rick Santorum territory following his oops heard round the world. Perry trying to do damage control by making the rounds of yesterday's morning shows, explaining that he'd stepped in it, then stepping in it all over again with a top 10 list performance on David Letterman, reminiscent of his bizarre New Hampshire speech from a week ago.
I thought the debate was tonight.
I see. Well, there you go. That happens to everybody. It was a mix-up, ladies and gentlemen. Sure. Number 6.
Hey, listen, you try concentrating with Mitt Romney smiling at you. That is one handsome dude.
Joining me now, Craig Crawford, political blogger, author of The Politics of Life. Good evening, Craig.
Happy 11/11/11.
Indeed. Mr. Cain.
It's a date even Rick Perry can remember.
There's 3 numbers in there. There's 11/11 and Mr. Cain first. Yes. His campaign boasted about record contributions this week and how they followed the allegations. Is that necessarily the logical fallacy? Did the one thing cause the other? Or isn't there a time lag to consider on donations?
Certainly, and they've been doing a lot of advertising on the web for that. One thing about Herman Cain and this sex harassment charges, he's really appealing to a lot of people who think that doesn't exist. It's something liberals made up. I mean, I think one reason he's getting in trouble with women is he doesn't take this issue seriously. He dismisses it. He jokes about it. I think he could still defend himself and also say, hey, it is a real thing and it's serious and we should fight against it, but he doesn't do that.
To Governor Perry, am I wrong in thinking that the top 10 list did not help last night? I mean, it was over the top almost in the way the speech was in New Hampshire. I thought it was like, amateur night at the Chuckle Hut plus that variable of what's wrong with him now.
Keith, these performances are so bad, that New Hampshire speech, his debate, and that weird appearance on Letterman, that if I were his spokesperson, I think the campaign would be better off by saying, oh, it's okay, he was just drunk. Because if he was sober in these appearances, that's actually worse.
Yeah, there was just something transcendent about that. I believe Admiral Stockdale has spoken to him from beyond the grave saying, I don't know what he's doing here. I mean, it's getting almost to the Stockdale level of things, isn't it?
It certainly is, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if he's trying to have a personality and this is the best he can do, or if he wants to audition for his own late night talk show or something. But at times I don't even think he's serious about this campaign. He's just playing. He is, after all, the governor of Texas, and that's something to fall back on.
True. Speaking of falling back, Newt Gingrich, as I said, has been expecting this to happen for 20 years at least. Is he just the last guy standing, or another passing fancy, or what is the deal with his prominence in the polling this week? Because there's only so many names on the list and you have to pick one.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this flavor of the month routine, I mean, there are only so many sugary flavors left. They may have to eat their vegetables and support Romney in the end. But Romney is like this. The Romney machine is like this big cruise ship just chugging across the sea, and all these other little speedboats just racing around it until they run out of fuel. And we're now down to Gingrich. I mean, one thing about Gingrich now, with connecting to the Kane story, is this will now resurface his issues with women. I mean, having his own affair in the 90s when he was blasting Bill Clinton for adultery, that'll all come back. And the evangelicals who think they like him now have to rethink that.
And the missus on her hospital bed during her cancer treatments. There's one report today, and I don't know how serious he is about this, but Nate Silver, who's usually relies on statistics, is reporting that Sarah Palin might be reconsidering, and she might have a chance. Is that either of those things plausible to you?
What makes it implausible to me is the filing deadlines. It's kind of a legal technicality, but a serious one, to get on the ballots in these early states. These ballot deadlines, filing deadlines are passing. Now, she's a big enough name. Most of these states have petition drive avenues. She could go that route, but it would be an uphill battle, and she'd certainly get a lot of media attention, I suppose. But again, I think the Republicans are just running out of alternatives. The anything but Romney movement is the anybody but Romney movement that is getting close to the point where it has to be somebody, not just anybody.
Do they have super delegates in the Republican process in addition to as the Democrats did 3 years ago?
Not near the impact that we saw in the Democrats. You'd have to have a much closer race for that to kick in.
All right, just checking. Just had that sudden flashback came through.
Oh, that's a painful flashback.
Sorry. Didn't mean to ruin your weekend on Friday. Craig Crawford, the author of the
And I'm in Florida, too.
Yes, author of the Politics of Life, now available at CraigCrawford.com. Thank you, Craig. Have a good weekend anyway.
Good to talk to you.
Karl Rove versus Elizabeth Warren and Karl Rove versus Occupy Wall Street. You can't separate the good guys from the bad guys in that picture, can you? Coming up. America's Vampire rolls out his line of 2011-2012 lies and slime ads, one of them so slimy and lie-filled it has already been pulled by one of the networks that was carrying it. That's next. First, the Sanity Break, and on this date 100 years ago, the previous 11/11/11, Saturday, November 11th, 1911, it saw Kansas City measure a record high temperature for the date of 76 degrees late in the morning. Then a cold front called the Great Blue Norther hit the Midwest, and before midnight it was 11 degrees in Kansas City. It dropped 65 degrees in in 14 hours. Springfield, Missouri went from a record high of 80 to 40 degrees with 40-mile-an-hour winds in 2 hours. By midnight, it was at a record low of 13 degrees. Oklahoma City also had record highs and lows on the same day, 83 and 17. The extreme temperature change unleashed November tornadoes in the upper Mississippi Valley, 9 of them in Michigan, and an Ohio blizzard, and in Janesville, Wisconsin, an F4 tornado followed by a blizzard. Time marches on. Beginning on the internet, two cats sizing each other up. The white one thinks, yeah, I could take this guy unless something bizarre happens, like he turns into a cobra. The scariest cobra I've seen since Johnny Lawrence. Sweep the leg. Eventually someone came by, played the flute, and the cobra went back into his cat basket. What the hell is this cat doing? Dateline, South Africa, where this hippo just enjoyed a nice swim. And like any other hippo, she decides to head back to her house. That's right, she's a pet hippo. Jessica, the hippo, has free reign of the house, so naturally she goes right to the kitchen for a snack. And she ate the woman in the hat there too, whole. Looks like she is a hungry hippo. When she's finished eating, she waddles back outside because at the end of the day, she's just too hippo for the room. Finally, we end as we always do with extreme surfing. That dot in the middle of the giant wave is Garrett McNamara, and the giant wave is the tallest ever surfed. Hang 10, dude. Or 90, I should say, is in a 90-foot wave. Services will be Thursday. This amazing feat took place off the coast of Portugal. They're saying it's the biggest wave since the 2007 Jets-Patriots game, the wave that made it around Gillette Stadium 4 times. Might be a different kind of wave. Time marches on. What do you see with the head of the journalism school at Columbia University to right-wing failed punk James O'Keefe ahead? Dumont's OK Mother, starring Dennis James, will not be seen tonight, so we can instead bring you Countdown, the longest continuously running 8 p.m. news hour on cable, unless you consider Fox News. Our primary replays at 11 p.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. Pacific. We call it our little tontine. In Republican circles, it is never the person with the facts or the most logic who wins the argument. It is the guy with the loudest voice. In our third story in the countdown, the master of the philosophy, Karl Rove, his political action committee, Crossroads GPS, has released its new ads, all of them loud, each more factually incorrect than the one that preceded it. On Tuesday, Crossroads released the ad called Two Presidents, which compared President Obama's and President Clinton's stances on raising taxes. The problem is that the Clinton soundbite they picked had been used in an ad in early October and was shown then to have been selectively edited to make it appear as if the president was against President Obama's tax plan. Rove then set his sights on Tim Kaine, who was running for the Senate from Virginia. The ad suggests the former governor supported $39 million for office upgrades for politicians and another $1.9 million to study ants in Africa. Both of those statements had been debunked in September 2010. Doesn't he have a new smear? They're all part of a $1.8 million ad buy this week by Crossroads, $4.4 million spent over the last 2 weeks. The most egregious attack contained a 2-for-1 deal, smearing Elizabeth Warren and the Occupy movement simultaneously.
14 million Americans out of work. But instead of focusing on jobs, Elizabeth Warren sides with extreme left protests. At Occupy Wall Street, protesters attack police, do drugs, and trash public parks. They support radical redistribution of wealth and violence. But Warren boasts, I created much of the intellectual foundation for what they do. I support what they do. Intellectual foundation for what? We need jobs, not intellectual theories and radical protests.
For the sake of brevity, we'll focus on what was not a lie there. There is someone named Elizabeth Warren. There's also a Occupy Wall Street movement at the moment. The bigger question is, with recent polling showing 60% of the Americans agreeing with the tenets of the Occupy movement, wouldn't putting the two together help Elizabeth Warren? Joining me now to address that and other questions, Ari Berman, contributor to The Nation magazine, author of Herding Donkeys, The Fight to Rebuild the Democratic Party and Reshape American Politics. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
The ad, is that actually going to wind up helping Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts?
It very well could, Keith, because if the election in Massachusetts becomes about the ideology of Karl Rove versus the ideology of Elizabeth Warren, that's a bet that I think Elizabeth Warren would like to take.
The Warren identity and persona is as threatening to the right as anybody on the left. And it's odd because although as well respected as she is on the left, I don't think she'd be ranked by people on the left as one of the top 3 people on left of center. Is that what is it about her that so terrifies Karl Rove and people with him?
Her brand of progressive populism is very, very resonant right now. Remember, she took on Wall Street before it was cool. She's not afraid of the banks. She's not beholden to the banks. And she's running for the Senate precisely because she wants to take them on. So that makes her very dangerous to corporate interests in both parties, particularly the Republican Party right now, because they're bankrolled by those very people. And so they've seen Elizabeth Warren as a threat all along. They saw her as a threat when she was at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and they see her as a threat now that she's running for Senate.
We were going to talk about, and something that occurred after we sort of decided to talk about this, the number of disproved and already disproved facts in this, and now over the transom, as they say, comes the news that one of the Crossroads GPS ads against John Tester, the senator in Montana, has been taken off the Cablevision Optimum cable service because it falsely accuses him of supporting tougher rules for farm dust. They tried to attack him, and he's a rancher who has been against any regulation. Not that there are going to be any regulations against dust. That's a whole right-wing boogeyman, another paranoia episode on their part. But they tried to smear Tester, the rancher, who was defending against dust rules, as if he was in support of dust rules. I mean, they're not even checking how good the lies are anymore?
Yeah, it's like the truth does not apply. We've known for a long time the truth doesn't apply to Karl Rove, but now they're really, really stretching it, and they're airing more and more outlandish attack ads, and they're finally starting to get called out on it. Now, Rove's feeling probably is it won't matter, right? People will see these ads, they'll believe them, it doesn't matter if we get called out on them. But it starts to hurt his credibility here if people start realizing what's going on. And with the Elizabeth Warren thing, I think there's a significant chance that it could backfire, both in terms of it being inaccurate, but also rallying people to her cause. Because we saw, for example, after that ad ran, a ton of people flooded the Elizabeth Warren website, made a lot of donations, and it helped her profile. It didn't hurt her at all.
What's going on against Tim Kaine, who's one of the other objects of this? Because Virginia obviously is a far more teeter-totter kind of state, and that you would think lies would go very far with the conservatives and perhaps the rightward-leaning middle-of-the-roaders in Virginia.
Well, they're replaying a line they used in the 2010 election, which is that Tim Kaine supported Obama's failed stimulus. And, of course, leave aside the fact that it saved all those 3 million jobs. But what they're saying is he used it, for example, to repair the Capitol, not noting that, for example, the stimulus money there was actually bonds to help state governments rebuild buildings. So it was a perfectly legitimate use of money, but they're making it seem like pork barrel spending on a wasted, failed stimulus.
Is Rove sticking to the Senate and some key House races, or might he get involved in the presidential election as well with these pieces of televised crap?
He'll probably do both, but they've already said they're going to spend $150 million on the Senate, and they're going to spend $150 million on other races, and they're going to go where they can get the most bang for their buck. And right now that's in these Senate races and these House races, try to set the narrative early on.
It'd be interesting to see if anybody else calls them on it as in the Tester ad. It's really extraordinary, the more I think about it, that they actually pulled the thing off the air, which says something to the dignity of broadcasting. That's not possible. The author of Herding Donkeys, The Fight to Rebuild the Democratic Party and Reshape American Politics, Ari Berman. Again, great thanks. Have a good
weekend.
Keith.
You too.
One senator voted against a tax break for companies hiring military veterans. Just one. He is defending his lone vote, saying this was just another giveaway to a special interest group. Worst person's next on Countdown. See if you can guess who it is. Thurber at his most wonderfully bitter, one of his many attacks on self-help books, How to Adjust Yourself to Your Work. First, the worst, the infamous James O'Keefe, reduced to a small puddle of O'Keefeness at Columbia's journalism school. We'll show you his Wicked Witch of the West moment next. James Thurber with eternal advice, how to adjust yourself to your work. That's next. First, because this is the place for us to spotlight those who have not adjusted to reality. Here, Countdown's top 3 nominees for today's Worst Person in the World. The runner-up, Congressman Lee Terry of the Nebraska 2nd. Congressman Terry has proposed the Mobile Informational Call Act of 2011, which was heard by the House Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. That sounds great. Increased transparency about the mobile carrier's labyrinthine billing practices and hidden fees and 73-year contracts, and from a Republican, no less? No, that's not what it's about, is it? Congressman Terry's Mobile Informational Call Act of 2011 would repeal the 20-year-old ban on robocalls and other pre-recorded announcement to cell phones, which would open conceivably the way to telemarketers. The rationale is that rates are so much lower now that everybody can afford the incoming charges for unwanted calls to your cell, and anyway you'd have to opt into the system. Actually, the way the bill is written, you'd be automatically opted in unless you gave written disapproval to your cell provider. And actually, Nebraska Congressman Lee Terry is just whoring himself out on behalf of the big telecoms. Runner-up, speaking of which, good old Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina, and of course, of a different dimension. The Senate voted 94-1 to pass an amendment to grant employers tax breaks of up to $9,600 for giving a job to a military veteran. Guess who the one was? I'll probably be accused of not supporting veterans by the politicians pandering for their votes, but I'm not going to be intimidated to vote for something that may make sense politically but is inherently unfair. DeMint actually argued that it is inherently unfair to give veterans an inside track on jobs. Why does Jim DeMint hate the troops? But our winner, little Jimmy O'Keefe. Last seen trotting around Occupy Wall Street, what businessmen wore in 1995 when colored shirts with white collars had not yet become Halloween costumes in hopes that somebody would bean him or something. The man who doctored the infamous Acorn videos has been owned. O'Keefe has discovered that a Columbia professor and Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter named Dale Maharaj had used both the S word and an F-bomb in an email. Seriously. This is a big deal to O'Keefe, apparently, big enough for him to have launched a series called To Catch a Journalist. Well, to fail to launch To Catch a Journalist. Little Jimmy went to Columbia to confront J-School Dean of Students Sri Srinivasan over the S-word and the F-bomb. It didn't go too well. If you have a sense, as you watch this, that O'Keefe is getting shorter the longer the video goes on, it ain't your TV. You're right.
You have an official status at the university and getting...
But why of all people, why do you pick me?
Because you're sitting here in the office.
Well, that's now. No, but why did you pick me on Facebook? I don't understand.
He's the Dean of Student Affairs, so we're trying to get your comment. And we're going to get the comment from a lot of people here today.
Wait, why didn't you dress like you were in some of your other videos?
I'm a chameleon. I adopt many different roles. So I appreciate your time. You obviously have no response. You stand behind profanity-laced emails.
I don't defend everything all my colleagues do, and I don't read or get involved with everybody. But I would have loved to see you in your other outfit. What else do you wear?
Oh, many different costumes.
Okay.
So this is great. I'm glad
this is great.
I'm glad we got
great about this?
I'm glad you stand beside Dale Maharaj's profanity-laced.
Dale Maharaj is a wonderful journalist and professor who's been teaching here for many years, and I'm a big fan of his.
And we look forward to releasing the next investigation of To Catch a Journalist and more professors here at Columbia University talking about the need to re-elect President Obama. That's very important that journalists do that, re-elect their politicians, not hold them accountable. So we look forward to releasing our next video, and we appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
His mic isn't plugged into anything. Why didn't you dress like you were in some of your other videos? Classic. Turns out, room full of J-School people, and they shut off their cameras before the best part. After he was done with me, Dean Srinivasan writes, I should have kept rolling because they get to the exit and they find they can't open it. He says, have they locked us in? Turns out they were pulling the door instead of pushing it. Little Jimmy O'Keefe starring in To Catch a Cold, today's worst person in the world. We resume Fridays with Thurber with one of the master's specialties. James Thurber hated self-help books. Hated them so much that in 1937 he put out an entire book condemning them called Let Your Mind Alone, Whence Our Story Comes Tonight. As usual, I'm reading from the Library of America, Thurber Writings and Drawings, edited by Garrison Keillor. Stand back, because here comes a man driven nearly mad by the endless self-helpery of the mid-20th century. Abridged slightly for time, and I hope you'll read the whole thing yourself. How to Adjust Yourself to Your Work by James Thurber. I find that the inspirational books are frequently disposed to touch with pontifical cheerfulness or owlish mysticism on the problem of how to get along in the business world, how to adjust yourself to your employer and to your fellow worker. It seems to me that in this field, the trainers of the mind, both lady and gentleman, are at their unhappiest. Let us examine what Mrs. Dorothea Brand, who is reputedly changing the lives of almost as many people as the Oxford Group, has to say on the subject. She presents the case of a man, she calls him you, who is on the executive end of an enterprise and feels he should be on the planning end. In that case, she writes, your problem is to bring your talents to the attention of your superior officers with as little crowding and bustling as possible. Learn to write clear, short, definitive memoranda and present them to your immediate superior until you are perfectly certain that he will never act upon them. In no other circumstances are you justified in going over his head. Very well. Let us start from Mrs. Brand's so-called point of justification in going over your superior's head and see what happens. Let us suppose that you have presented your favorite memoranda to your immediate superior, Mr. Sutphin, twice, and nothing has happened. You are still not perfectly certain that he will never act upon them. To be sure, he has implied, or perhaps even said in so many words that he never will. But you think that maybe you have always caught him at the wrong moment. So you get up your memoranda a third time. Mr. Sutphin, glancing at your paper and noting that it is the same old plan for tearing out the west wall or speeding up the out-of-town truck deliveries or substituting colored lights for bells, is pretty well convinced that all you do in your working hours is write out memoranda. He figures that you are probably suffering from a mild form of monomania and determines to dispense with your services if you submit any memoranda again. After waiting a week and hearing nothing from Mr. Sutphin, you decide, in accordance with Mrs. Brand's suggestion, to go over his head and take the matter up with Mr. Leffley. In doing so, you will not be stringing along with me. I advise you not to go over Mr. Sutphin's head to Mr. Leffley. I advise you to quit writing memoranda and get to work. The Mr. Leffleys of this country have enough to do the way it is, or think they have, and they do not like to have you come to them with matters which should be taken up with the Mr. Sutphins. They are paying the Mr. Sutphins to keep you and your memoranda from suddenly bobbing up in front of them. In the first place, if you accost the Mr. Leffleys personally, you become somebody else in the organization whose name and occupation they are supposed to know. Already they know who too many people are. In the second place, the Mr. Leffleys do not like to encounter unexpected memoranda. It gives them a suspicion that there is a looseness somewhere. It destroys their confidence that things are going all right. It shakes their faith in the Mr. Sutphins and in the Mr. Bairds, the Mr. Crowfoots, and the old Miss Bendleys, who are supposed to see that every memorandum has been filed away or is being acted on. I know of one young man who was already sending to his particular Mr. Leffley over Mr. Sutphin's head memoranda done up in limp leather covers and tied with ribbon. This to show that he was not only clear, short, and definite, but neat. Mr. Leffley did not even glance between the leather covers. He simply told Miss Bendley to turn the thing over to Mr. Sutphin, who had already seen it. The young man was let go. He is now a process server. Keep, I say, your clear, short, and definite memoranda to yourself. If Mr. Sutphin has said no, he means no. If he has taken no action is going to be taken. People who are all the time submitting memoranda are put down as jealous, disgruntled, and vaguely dangerous. Employers do not want them around. Sooner or later, Mr. Sutphin or Mr. Leffley himself sees to it that a printed slip, clear, short, and definite, is put in their pay envelopes. In embroidering the theme that imagination can help you with your fellow workers, Miss Brand also writes, when you have seen this, you can work out a code for yourself which will remove many of the irritations and dissatisfactions of your daily work. Have you ever been amused and enlightened by seeing a familiar room from the top of the stepladder, or in mirrors set at angles to each other, seeing yourself as objectively for a second or two as anybody else in the room? It is that effect you should strive for in imagination. Here again, I cannot hold with the dear lady. The nature of imagination, as she describes it, would merely terrify the average man. The idea of bringing such a distorted viewpoint of himself into his relation with his fellow workers would twist his personality laboriously out of shape and in the end appall his fellow workers. Men who catch an unfamiliar view of a room from the top of a stepladder are neither amused nor enlightened. They have a quick, gasping moment of vertigo which turns rapidly into plain terror. No man likes to see a familiar thing at an unfamiliar angle or in an unfamiliar light. And this goes above all things for his own face. The glimpses that men get of themselves in mirrors set at angles to each other upset them for days. Frequently they shave in the dark for weeks thereafter. To ask a man to steadily contemplate this thing he has been seeing fleetingly in a mirror and to figure it as dealing with his fellow workers day to day is to ask him to abandon his own character and to step into another which he both disowns and dislikes. Split personality could easily result. I don't know why I am reminded at this point of my Aunt Kate Obetz, but I am. She was a woman without any imaginative la-di-da, without any working code save that of direct action, who ran a large dairy farm near Sugar Grove, Ohio, after her husband's death and ran it successfully. One day something went wrong with the cream separator, and one of her hands came to her and said nobody on the farm could fix it. Should they send to town for a man? "Now," shouted my Aunt Kate, "I'll fix it myself." Shouldering her way past a number of dairy workers, farmhands, and members of her family, she grasped the cream separator and began monkeying with it. In a short time, she had reduced it to even more pieces than it had been in when she took hold of it. She couldn't fix it. She was just making things worse. At length, she turned on the onlookers and bawled, "Why doesn't somebody take this goddamn thing away from me?" Here was a woman as far out of the tradition of inspirationalist conduct as she could be. She admitted failure. She had no code for removing irritations and dissatisfactions. She viewed herself as in a single mirror directly. She lost her temper. She swore in the presence of subordinates. She confessed complete surrender in the face of a difficult problem. She didn't think of herself as a room seen from the top of a stepladder. And yet, her workmen and her family continued to love and respect her. Somebody finally took the cream separator away from her. Somehow it was fixed. Her failure did not show up in my aunt's character. She was always the same as ever. For true guidance and sound advice in the business world, we find, I think, that the success books are not the place to look, which is pretty much what I thought we would find all along. How to Adjust Yourself to Your Work by James Thurber. That's Countdown for Friday. I'm Keith Olbermann. Congratulations once again on getting through yet another day of this crap. Good night and good luck.